This was supposed to be Hassan Reddick's day, Rube.
Where have we heard that before? This is Stacey Andrews' day, right?
Yeah, it was supposed to be Hassan's day, and we'll talk about Hassan Reddick and his press conference. We'll talk about Howie Roseman and his extension. We'll talk about the guy in Washington in a little bit. But the big news is Fletcher Cox getting released.
Yeah, and I'm going to let Dave explain all the cap ramifications, but it's
It's a tricky one.
it's really complicated. We'll try to give you a sense of what's happening. I think there's still somewhat of a chance he'll be back at a lower salary. I don't think it's a slam dunk. We'll see. It's Howie has spoken a lot about taking the emotion out of doing his job, and it's not easy for him. And he knows that he's hung on to players too long who aren't what they used to be and who are liabilities or just not worth the money they're making. And look, Fletcher's an all-time great, but he's just not that good anymore. So you kind of understand the move.
Yeah. I should mention this is the Eagle Eye podcast if you haven't figured it out quite yet. With Reuben Frank, I'm Dave Zangaro. So the reason this happens on Thursday is because if they didn't release him by 4:00, then basically $18 million would be guaranteed. So there was kind of a ticking time bomb in this contract. And the Eagles have tried to trade him. I mean, they were listening to offers for him during the season last year. They were listening to offers for him recently. They didn't get anything back. They didn't get any offers back that they thought were worthy. They were looking for a day 2 pick. It didn't come in. So they end up releasing him. We've confirmed that. And they're also trying to bring him back at a lower cost. So that ship has not sailed. There's a chance that he could be back, but they had to release him now because if they didn't, then that $18 million would have been guaranteed.
Yeah, and presumably they were trying to get him to agree to a lower contract, but there was kind of a deadline for that. And they couldn't go past that deadline. And there's two things at play. The one is simple, is they save $18 million in money. And that's actual money they don't have to pay him. The cap ramifications are extremely complicated, and we actually don't know the exact correct numbers. Nobody does. There's a lot of different numbers out there, a lot of different reports. I think it'll all be clarified in the next, hopefully soon. But I mean, it is complicated. I think the number one thing is he's not the player he used to be, and they understand that. And it's not easy to do this with an all-time great Eagle. I mean, let's face it, he's 6 Pro Bowls. How many guys have been in more Pro Bowls in Eagles history? Reggie, Doc, how many other guys?
It's a small handful.
Pihos. There's not many. So he's an all-timer. He's got a case
Jason
for the Hall.
Peters. Yeah, PPOs is tied. So the only ones with more are Chuck Bednarik with 8, Dawkins with 7, Jason Peters with 7, and Reggie White with 7. Those are the only guys in franchise history with more Pro Bowls.
Yeah. Rick Lovato, what's he at, 1?
1. He's catching up.
He's catching up.
But that's the thing. In a way, it's a shame because if this is the way his Eagles career ends, it's kind of a weird way to end it. Us just sitting here talking about the salary cap and what it means for their bottom line, because we shouldn't lose the fact that like this is an all-time great player that might not be back. And I almost think he won't be back.
Yeah.
The way things transpired last year, and I know him and Jonathan Gannon mended fences and they used Fletcher better in the second half of the season, but there was clearly some frustration there. He let that frustration boil over publicly, and he's known they've been trying to trade him now for months. So you have to start thinking, like, is this guy going to want to come back here, or does he want to just start somewhere new where he gets some assurances that they're going to play him the way he wants to be played?
Yeah. Now, the fact that, look, it's really hard to trade a player in his 30s who's declining. Teams don't want to give up draft picks for a declining player. And I wasn't surprised at all. I think we talked about this maybe back at the trade deadline. it's really tough to get any kind of pick, even a mid-round pick. As great as Fletcher was, teams don't want to give up a pick for a guy that's 32, and especially one who's expensive, because if you get him in a trade, you get the contract too. So I'm not surprised they weren't able to trade him. I'm a little.
My guess is they looked at that contract and said, "I'm not dealing with that." That's what I would have done. Burn that thing to the ground.
That's fair, but it's not surprising, and I am a little surprised that they couldn't come to an agreement on a lower salary, because Fletcher seems to understand he didn't play well last year, and he talked about it the last time we talked to him. Maybe going into the playoff week, maybe after the season. It might have been after the season.
It was after the season.
Yeah, you're right. It's after the season, and we talked to him maybe that Tuesday or Wednesday, and he said, "I know it was an up and down year. I didn't play the way I hope to," but he said, I still believe I'm one of the best defensive tackles in the league as well. So maybe he, obviously they couldn't come to any kind of agreement. I can't imagine the Eagles lowballed him too much. I mean, you're not going to offer Fletcher Cox, $2 million a year, but obviously they were too far apart to get anything done. I'm with you. I don't think he is coming back. But I also don't think he's going to get a whole ton of money either. And if that's what it's about, I mean, he's made over $100 million. Now, he's made more money than any player in Eagles history from the Eagles. He's I think JP is second. I have a whole chart, but he's obviously set for life, and a few other lives. But he's a very prideful guy as well. And like you said, he sat there while they've tried to trade him for several months and twice, 2 different time periods. And he might just want to start fresh. I honestly, I really don't think he has a whole lot left, Dave. I really don't. And I think teams understand that.
Yeah. I mean, he's played a lot, he's 31, which, yes, defensive linemen play into their 30s, but he has a lot of wear and tear on him. And to his credit, I mean, the guy has played through injury after injury after injury. It's fair to wonder how much tread is left on those tires. And it really is a credit to him. I remember a few years ago, he was dealing with an injury, and he got so annoyed with me asking him about it. He just looked at me and said, "Stop asking about it. If I'm not going to play, I'll let you know." He plays through everything. I mean, he's been such a constant performer, not just in the level of play, but just him being on the field for that long. But that does take a toll on a body, and I think we've seen that with him.
Yeah, and it's been a real steady decline. I think we first saw it probably in, I think, 2019.
2018 was his best season, so he peaked there. I mean, that was his all-pro year.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I think we saw the decline, but I think he kind of declined in 2019. I think he declined back to where he had been before, and then it's kind of been down since then a little bit.
Yeah, and then 2020, you could really see the difference. He just wasn't dominating. He was getting he was getting washed out on running plays, and then last year I thought was a significant decline from 2020, and he did play better the second half of the year, maybe the last six or 8 weeks.
Once they began using him differently too, I want to point that out. He certainly wasn't playing well, and I think he wasn't, for the first time maybe in his career, he probably wasn't as invested, let's be frank about it, in
I'm always frank.
He was asked. I was waiting for that, and what he was asked to do. But there was more buy-in second half of the year, and he did play better.
Yeah, but he didn't play at a Pro Bowl level. He was above average, I guess. But teams look at that, how a guy's trending, and once you hit 31, you don't generally start trending the other direction. It just doesn't happen. So, unless it's an injury situation. In his case, it hasn't been. It's just been, and it's not. Look, I'm not criticizing him. I mean, he's had a better run than almost anybody in franchise history. It just happens. I mean, it's just it's a stupid old cliche that age is undefeated. But I mean, Fletcher, like you said, what year did he come out? 2012. He's played 10 years. He's probably averaged 15 games a year. He's played 150 games, 160 with playoffs, and that's a lot of football. That's a lot of football, and I think he can still be a functional piece on a defense. But when you look at the numbers that we're tossing around, and I think most Eagles fans, at least, the tweets I've seen, I tweeted out your story and the tweets on it. People are like, yeah, he's not Fletch anymore. And, usually when the Eagles kind of cut ties with all-time greats, there's a lot of pushback from fans, understandably. And especially after there's been some all-time greats who've been released. I mean, gosh, some of the greatest players in Eagles history have been cut. So, but I think fans understand, it's that time and where this team is and where they're trying to go. And, the roster they're trying to build, he just doesn't really fit right now.
Yeah, I want to try to explain one more cap thing. So if you see me jump out my window, that's why. So I'm already getting texts from my friends saying they're saving $18 million and now they have all this money to spend, which isn't the case. I think some people are going to see this release and think the Eagles are gearing up for a big signing because they're freeing up all this money, which isn't the case because they release him with a post-June 1st designation, which basically means they have to carry his current cap charge through that date of June 1st. So yes, they saved the money they would have given him in guaranteed that would have triggered today, but it's not like they just freed up all the salary cap space right now that they can go out and sign people. Really, where it's going to help them is being able to sign their draft picks down the line because they're going to need a good portion of money to do that. So I just want to clear that up because I think when people see they've cut Fletcher Cox, they're saving all this money. I think the natural inclination for fans is to think, oh, what's happening? Are they about to sign some big name free agent that costs all this money? No, I mean, that's not really what's happening here. What's happening is they're kind of preventing something that they just couldn't allow to happen with that $18 million becoming guaranteed. So it's tricky. It's a tricky thing. And I hope that I never have to look at this contract again after today, but that's kind of the long and short of it. And the easiest way to think about it is if he does re-sign, they'll save the difference between that $18 million that would have been guaranteed and whatever he signs for.
Right. Well, we should probably get into the dead money. At least we should at least try. And there is some confusion about the exact amount of dead money. I believe it. I think from everything I've tried to figure out, I think it's about $12 million for 2022, and we think it's about $15 million for 2023. But it could be $22 million. But it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot of dead money. The $18 million is cash that they don't have to, that's a check that Jeff Lurie doesn't have to write. But that really has nothing to do with the cap stuff. I mean, it affects it, but it doesn't. It does, like you said, it doesn't clear up $18 million in cap space. They'll get some. They'll get some cap space, but
and I want to bring this up because we're going to talk about Howie in a little bit, and there's always so much criticism of his kick the can deals. And in general, I think some of that criticism, at least in my opinion, is overblown because I think in theory, it's kind of a smart way to handle the cap because presumably the cap goes up each year as long as you don't have a worldwide pandemic, which cross that one off. It happened and it sucked and they had to kind of deal with that when it happened. But theoretically, the cap keeps rising. So if you kick the can, you'll be able to deal with those big dead money hits later on. It's not the most ideal way to deal with it, but that's what they've done. For the most part, it's worked out. In this case, they probably did hold on too long, and they probably went back to this contract to restructure it a few too many times, and then they're left with this kind of behemoth that we're looking at right now, and that's a problem. And I think that I'd imagine if you put a lie detector on Howie right now, he'd admit they've done too much to this contract and they've made it a little too tough on themselves.
Yeah, I would agree. Though his last extension was when? Do you remember offhand?
Last year, I think. I mean, they've done one just about every year the last few years.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. And I think as a philosophy, it works because, the $8 million under the cap this year is a lower percentage than $8 million it's going to be the next year or the year after or the year after. It's going to, the percentage so that $8 million is less of a cap hit each successive year. Just because the cap's growing and the $8 million isn't. It's kind of like buying a house. What's the best way to make money is buy a house, and it's just going to keep, being worth more every year. It's not really that much like it, but it just kind of came to me. But this is probably a little much. But when you have a player like that, it's important to keep them happy. It's important to keep them, paid as one of the higher paid guys in the league. I understand that. It's a tricky thing. It's a tricky thing, and you don't know when that decline is going to come. Joe Banner got criticized all the time for moving on from players at a certain age, usually around 30 or 31, and all the players that he moved on from never did anything after they left here. None of them, not one. And the analytics will tell you that it just doesn't make sense to pay guys in their 30s huge amounts of money at most positions. I think quarterbacks are different. I mean, there's, I guess tackles seem to be, they seem to play well to their 30s. They can, but D tackles, running backs, obviously, there's some positions that just doesn't pay. So it's interesting. And, our next podcast, what's today? Our next podcast. So hopefully by our next podcast, we'll have a real concrete idea. Again, there are websites that are devoted exclusively to salary cap minutia, and the people that put them out, Over the Cap is one, and Spotrac is the other. Dave's more of an Over the Cap guy. I'm more of a Spotrac guy. Although Jason from Over the Cap is brilliant and has been really helpful to me trying to understand some different things.
I'll plug his book. I keep it in my bookshelf. Crunching Numbers.
Yeah. If
you ever want to nerd out and try to understand the NFL salary cap and contracts, it's an invaluable resource. It's
great. And I think Dave and I are both we're both contract nerds. I mean, we just love this stuff. And I'll never forget when we had some contract we were both going over at the same time trying to figure it out. And it was some new little trick that Howie had. I can't even remember what it might have had to do with voidable year. It might have been the original
they haven't been around for that long.
Yeah, but we were on the phone for an hour. I remember I was sitting in Mercer Cafe, and I think you were at the NovaCare in the office or something. We were on the phone for an hour, and we figured it out. We made the numbers all work and add up, and we were like, that's just one of those moments. You're pumping your fist and celebrating and doing the icky shuffle and all that. I love this stuff, and I love trying to understand exactly why contracts are structured the way they are. What's you see a bonus and it's 13.153682. Where did that number come from? What is that a percentage of? How did they come up with that? Why is that the number they agreed on? I'm fascinated by it. But my point is, even the two sites that are devoted exclusively to NFL salary cap stuff, down to the penny, down to every detail, they're run by people that understand this way better than I do. They disagree on these dead number amounts. They're not even sure. And Jason even wrote a piece that he just posted a few minutes ago on Over the Cap, trying to explain. He said, "Look, I don't even understand all of this," and I give him credit because, most people would be they would just not acknowledge that, not admit it. But it's so complicated, it's so convoluted, and it's so different that there is some confusion about exactly how much dead money the Eagles will incur. We'll know soon. I think it'll sort itself out. But right now it's a lot. We just don't know exactly how much.
All right, you want to move on to the football side of things?
Let's move on. Unless you want to
Let me
talk about like workout
take my
bonus.
glasses off now. We can talk football for a little bit. Let's talk about what the Eagles have at defensive tackle if Fletcher doesn't come back, because not much there. I mean, Javon Hargrave under contract, but only through this season. As I've mentioned before on this podcast, probably time to lock down an extension with him to keep him around. But after him, you have Milton Williams, who sure came off a pretty good rookie season. Hassan Ridgeway just signed a free agent deal with San Francisco, so he's not coming back. Then you're down the Marlon Tuipulotu and Marvin Wilson, was an undrafted rookie last year. I mean, they just don't
making the team though.
I do, but maybe that looks a little better right now. But they don't really have a ton there.
I think Howie saw that and said, "Oh, we can cut Fletch."
Yeah. It's a concern because this is a position they care about. And I think everyone was kind of banking on having Fletcher and Javon Hargrave back together this year. And now that's not a definite.
Now, we know they really like Milton, and, they could look at Milton Williams and think he's ready for a bigger role. He was the third guy in, and, he's a third-round pick. He's the kind of guy that I think he really benefited from. You have Hargrave and Fletcher in there, beating people down. Then you bring in a fresh Milton Williams, and that's a great opportunity for him. But they could look at him, and I was really impressed with the kid. I thought he just got better and better as the year went on, and I'm sure they what did he average? About 35 snaps. I should have looked it up. I think about 35 snaps a game. If he's starting, that's only going to go up about 10 or 12. He's going to 45 to 50, maybe some games. So they could really look at him and project him as being a starter. And then there's draft, and there's Jordan Davis, and there's Wyatt. There's, take your pick of a Georgia D tackle, where they're picking, they got a shot. So that could be part of the plan as well.
Yeah, and there's more than those too. I mean, that was the one thing that really stuck out to me when I was down in Mobile this year at the Senior Bowl watching those practices. And I was paying attention to the defensive tackles, but I wasn't super locked in because I figured edge is a bigger need. Well, if Fletcher Cox isn't back, guess what? Defensive tackle is a bigger need than edge rusher all of a sudden. And there are some good ones. Jordan Davis, it's funny. Before this pre-draft process, I would have said probably not, because he's such a big guy and you think of him as being like this run-stuffing defensive tackle. But then you see the way he's testing and you're like, well, I mean, he can do anything. He's just a freak. And the way he's testing, though, I'm not so sure he's going to be available when they're on the board at 15. But he's one. Devontae Wyatt from Georgia, who I think Daniel Jeremiah actually had them taking in his last mock draft, which kind of surprised people. So, I mean, look, I think it was a possibility before all this, but it's certainly a possibility now. And then there are other ones. I mean, DeMarvin Leal, who a little undersized compared to those guys. He's probably more of like a 3-4 end, but he's out there. Travis Jones from UConn just wrecked shop. He was one of the most impressive players down in Mobile. He's a guy who might be a second-round pick. Perion Winfrey, another guy who was at the Senior Bowl, probably a second-round pick. I'm going through my list of guys. Neil Farrell from LSU, probably a mid-round guy. Logan Hall from Houston, he might be a 3-4 end, but he's out there. There are guys out there. Haskell Garrett from Ohio State. And now I'm at the point where, yeah, I mean, I think it's likely that they end up with a defensive tackle in day one or day two.
And Howie being Howie, we know that if he loves, Jordan, I mean, they've got the weapons, the munitions to move up in that first round. And if there's a guy that they want at 10, he'll go get him at 10. I don't think he'll hesitate to do that.
Yeah, so. I mean, and they have the ammo to do it. And if they think Jordan Davis is that type of player, like, why not?
Why not? And, they certainly might.
Yeah. I think it's a real possibility.
Yeah.
And Wyatt's in that mix too. The other ones, Leal's an interesting one. There was a long time where people thought he was like a top 10 pick, and I don't think that's the consensus at all anymore. I mean, some people think he might not even be a first round pick.
Right.
So maybe he could be a trade down candidate in the second round. I don't know if Travis Jones will be there, but that'd be a good pick. Perrion Winfrey would be a great pick in the second round. There's going to be options.
Eagles had a Travis Jones once, a quarterback. He was a practice squad quarterback from Georgia. I think that was his name, Travis Jones. Preston Jones?
Oh.
Anyway.
Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway, yeah, you look at that D line now, and it's going to be really interesting because, BG is 34. I think he's 34 now, coming off an Achilles. Derek Barnett's going to be gone. Ridgway's gone, who is a great player, but he ate a lot of snaps this year. He, gave you some snaps. Fletcher potentially gone. It's going to be a lot of upheaval on that D line.
Yeah. All right, let's move on now. Howie Roseman got a contract extension reported first by Philly voice Jimmy Kempski. That was a nice scoop by him. But it's something that's not shocking, and I know fans are going to roll their eyes at it, but Howie wasn't going anywhere, and he was entering the last year of his contract extension that he and Doug Peterson signed after the Super Bowl. And it's really funny because after the Super Bowl, the Eagles had those two sign the contract, and they paraded it around. Jeff Lurie was releasing statements and quotes, and they were really in the afterglow. And now this time, Howie signs an extension and no one hears about it until a couple weeks later. But he's going to be here now through 2025, and that's the same time that Nick Sirianni's contract runs through, so they sync them up.
Yeah, and obviously he wasn't the GM in 2015, but I mean he was named GM in February of 2010. So you're looking at a decade and a half. I don't know how many GMs. I can look that up. I think Pro Football Reference lists all the GMs each team's had. So I'm curious how many GMs, Ozzie, there's not a lot who've been GM longer than Howie.
And on his fourth coach now.
On his fourth coach now.
That's almost unprecedented.
It is. It's I know people. I mean, I get 100 fire Howie tweets a day, and I really appreciate every single one of them. But I mean, the reality is Jeff Lurie Howie's going to be here as long as Jeff Lurie is, and he might be here as long as Julian Lurie's owning the team because he's exactly what Jeff Lurie's looking for in a GM. And I know all about the first round busts. We've talked about them for ad infinitum about Fireman Danny and Marcus Smith and Dillard and Rager, and those are inexcusable picks. And throw Derek Barnett in there too, Mr. 21 and a half sacks in 5 years. But the bottom line is they win, and they've won pretty consistently since he's been here. Since he was named GM, they have the ninth best record or eighth best record in football. Only 6 teams have won more playoff games than the Eagles. Or been to the playoffs more often, I should say. They won a Super Bowl during his reign. And I think the thing that a lot of Eagles fans lose sight of, and I lose sight of it sometimes, is that every GM has first-round misses. Every GM overpays free agents. Every GM misses on re-signing guys, and it ends up, being a disaster. And, we're so, narrow-focused on what the Eagles do. You start looking around the league and go through any team's first-round picks, and every team has a Marcus Smith in there. Every team has a Fireman Danny in there. And, so I think Howie's got a few more spectacular misses in the first round than a lot of teams. But, I think he's made up for it with, you can't rip him for missing on, you look at the 2011 draft. I mean, they drafted Fireman Danny in the first round, but they drafted Kelsey in the 6th round. So that's a net positive. Now, in the long run, you can't keep missing on those guys. But if, his record after the first round is pretty good. The Goddards and Sweats and Mulata in the 7th round. And, Quez in the 6th round, Gainwell in the 5th round. All that matters is that you get players. And I think right now They've got the nucleus of, they've got a decent young nucleus. And with these picks, 5 of the first 83 picks, they have an opportunity to really replenish the roster and have a pretty decent roster. So they've always been competitive under Howie. It's frustrating because he doesn't always do things that seem obvious to us, but he does a lot of things that aren't obvious to anybody that end up as, really successful moves. So there's so many of those under the radar moves that I don't think it's fair to just talk about the first round misses, because there's so many other things he needs to be, and then you look at the trades and you look at the cap management and all the other stuff he does. So it's a mixed bag. Obviously it's a mixed bag. He's got holes in his game, but you look around the league and who are you going to get who's better? Like, who are you going to get who does all the things he does and do them better? So, there's been times where I just like, Lurie, you got to fire this guy. There's been times I felt that way myself, but when you try to step back and look at other teams, look at other GMs, and look where the Eagles franchise is and what they've done. They won a Super Bowl with Howie Roseman as the GM, and he built that team. And it wasn't a conventional build, but they won. They won a championship. So I know a lot of people are disappointed and frustrated, but he's not going anywhere.
Yeah, the one thing I did disagree with in your column that you guys should check out. It was a good piece. You mentioned that.
Completely disagreed with it.
Well, no, I disagreed with one part that you said he's GM as long as Jeff Lurie's the owner. I don't think anyone's leash is that long. I mean, he has one of the longer leashes in the NFL, and we know how much Jeff Lurie trusts him, but no one's leash is infinite. I mean, I think back to when they brought Howie back into power, and I thought Lurie back then was pretty honest about, you mentioned the holes in his game. I mean, he was pretty honest about wanting to bring in a top talent evaluator, personnel guy, that was like a caveat to him hiring back Howie in that spot. So it's not like Lurie's completely blind to some of those rough patches in Howie's resume. And that caveat, they ended up pushing back that search, but it ended up being Joe Douglas. He brought with him Andy Weidel, who's now the head personnel guy under Howie. And we'll see if Andy stays here, because he's in contention for the job in Pittsburgh, the general manager job in Pittsburgh. But it's not like Jeffrey doesn't see it. And I always think back to this. I mean, if Lurie could get rid of Joe Banner, he can get rid of anyone.
He got rid of Joe Banner for Howie.
Sure.
So, I mean, that tells you what he thinks of Howie. You might be
but
right.
He still got rid of Joe Banner, who was this childhood friend.
Yeah. I mean, Howie was pretty much his childhood friend when Howie was a child. I mean, that's how young he was when he joined the organization. But maybe you're right. I just think if it was going to happen, I feel like it would have happened. I mean, there were some pretty low points, and so maybe you're right. I just think he's so tied to him. I think he's exactly what Jeff Lurie is looking for in a GM as far as communication, and they speak the same language. They talk the same. I mean, I just think there's a real symbiotic relationship there, and I can't imagine what it would take for that to end. You could be right, but I'd be surprised.
Yeah, I mean, I just think never say never. That's the kind of way I look at it. But you're right. I mean, Howie definitely speaks the language that Lurie wants to hear. And look, there's ups and downs with them. There are things he does well, and there are things he doesn't do well. But I think the one aspect that Lurie really appreciates about Howie is that he's willing to kind of look outside the box and be a forward thinker. And it doesn't always work, but we see this. He wants the Eagles to be kind of on the cutting edge of the NFL, and they aren't always there. I mean, they're just not always there, but that's the one thing we know about Jeff Lurie is he wants to figure out what the trends are going to be, and he wants to hit them first. And whether or not the Eagles do it consistently, Howie at least has proven to him that he wants to do it. And that's his MO too. And I think that really matters to Jeff Lurie.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's totally true. I also think Howie's gotten better at listening. I think he seems to get along with the other personnel guys who are in. He seems to respect them and listen to them. And I think that's something he struggled with early. I mean, he's spoken about it, I think, in his first run here.
Plenty of other people have spoken about it too.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think he's gotten better. I think he's gotten better at that. You don't hear that stuff anymore. You don't hear, that kind of um, negativity around him anymore. Maybe it's still there. I think he's improved in that way. I think he did a lot of self reflection, and but yeah, love him or hate him, he's your GM.
Yeah, and for at least a few more years. He was entering the final year of his contract, and it's pretty rare for a GM to be a lame duck. So they extend him, and that's where we are. All right, Hassan's day. It's Hassan's day. Hassan Reddick got introduced to reporters. It was nice being back in the auditorium at the NovaCare complex. Been a couple years since anyone had been in there from the media. But Hassan Reddick, what'd you make of his first comments to Philadelphia?
Yeah,
as an Eagle, I should say. I guess he's talked to people in the city before a little
bit. Seemed like super excited to be back in Philadelphia. He was really vague about how he expects to be used. He said, he kind of waits to see what happens at OTAs, but just, he's a guy who grew up in South Jersey, went to Temple, and has family here. He talked about how his family couldn't see him play as much when he was in Arizona. He was obviously only in Carolina 1 year. So yeah, he seemed excited. I'd like to know more about how I want to talk to Gannon, and I want to know more about how he plans to use him, where he sees him fitting in. He said he's versatile. He said, I'm a football player, just put me on the field and I'll make plays. I'd like to. There was a great video. Did you see the video the Eagles posted of Reddick in the weight room?
Oh yeah, meeting a few of the guys.
Yeah, it was really cool. I mean, building those relationships up. It seemed like he and Mulata had a little history between them.
Well, I mean, it was Mulata got beat for that sack by Reddick this past year.
Yeah, playing right tackle.
Yeah, Mulata let him know he was on the right side.
Yeah, yeah,
not the correct side.
Exactly, but yeah, it was cool. But so seems happy to be here. He got a really good contract. I thought he might get a little more money, so I don't know if there was a hometown discount, but
he wouldn't answer that question. But the way he wouldn't answer that question made me think that might have been some of it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Just seemed really thrilled to be back home. So we'll see. I'm really looking forward to seeing. We'll be at OTAs next month, so looking forward to seeing where he lines up, how he lines up, and watching him in action. Yeah,
and the one thing that's clear about him is he's a pass rusher, and the Eagles would be foolish to not use him in that way. Honestly, they would just be idiots on if they signed us on Reddick and said, you're playing off ball quite a bit. That's not what he does best. We saw that. I mean, Arizona tried that. They drafted him as a pure linebacker, and it wasn't until they let him really become an edge rusher that he started to have success in the league. So I thought it was a little strange that he said they haven't really gotten too much into X's and O's. You'd think for a player that has been misused in his career, that would have been.
I'm sure they've talked about it. He just didn't seem to want to talk about it.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, I hope that's the case for his sake, because if you're a player who's been misused in the NFL and you're about to sign a free agent contract, if it were me, I'd want to know what you plan for me, right? I mean, you want to know how you're going to be used, because he's going to have a chance to get another contract after this.
Yeah, no doubt. But that's the big kind of unanswered question, and we'll see. We'll see soon enough.
So that's the only free agent signing we have to talk about right now is Hassan Reddick. They haven't signed anyone else. Reuben, are you getting concerned at all?
No, not really. I was looking up in 2017, every single significant free agent they signed was after the initial flurry. Some of them were, I mean, some of them were in June, and some of them were during the season. I mean, J.J. was during the season; it was trade. But no, I think, look, the prices are real. I mean, wide receivers are getting a ton of money, and I'm operating under the assumption that they're going to draft a wide receiver pretty high. So it kind of makes sense that they don't sign a big money free agent receiver. I think they'll sign a free agent receiver, and there's still going to be some good ones out there. But I think it makes sense to wait for the prices to come down a little bit. Teams are paying a lot of money. I mean, look what the Jaguars are doing. I don't know how smart that is. I think they're overpaying for people. That's not how the Eagles do business. I think it's smart to back off. They've got flexibility with those draft picks. I think that gives them the flexibility to not force anything in free agency. And I know it's frustrating because you just want action. You want them to do something, but that's not how you can't operate by, let's just do something. That's not how to. So there's guys out there who are still, I mean, I looked at the top 100 free agents, 51 are still out there. So there's good players out there. Prices are going to come down. And that's Howie's way. When the prices start to come down and they can get guys for reasonable deals, they will. Now, safety is a concern because they just don't have any safeties. So, and there's not a ton of them out there. So, at some positions, maybe you have to be a little more aggressive than you want to be and overpay for somebody. But so far, restraint. I can never evaluate free agency after 3 or 4 days or whatever it's been, and we'll see what they end up with. But I would assume. So I'm not concerned. Let's step back and give them the next a week or so and see what they come up with. I'm confident they'll start addressing some needs once the prices come down.
I was a little surprised that they weren't in on a safety, though. I mean, some of the prices weren't that bad, especially like Jordan Whitehead got 2 years, $14.5 million. I think I would have been in on that. I know there are some cheaper options, but he's a 25-year-old guy. I know he was your guy in the process. He got a cheaper deal than some of the other safeties. I would have been in on that. There are still some options. Who knows what will happen? Maybe they have signed someone by the time you guys are listening to this, but Jaron Kearse is a guy who kind of makes sense. Played for Jonathan Gannon before, only has 1 year, one real good year, 1 year of starting service under his belt, but that's kind of where I look. Receiver, there's still some options, but they're going to sign people. I mean, it's not like they're done. More signings will come.
Right. Yeah, and I do think it, in the long run, it makes sense to wait for the initial flurry every year. That initial flurry of overpay. I think we're kind of beyond that now. I think now is where you're going to start to see contracts make sense. And I think I would guess in the next 72 hours you'll see the Eagles make some moves. I think.
Okay. The last bit of news, and it's a good bit of news. Guy in Washington is changing his number back to 11, so we can call him 11 again.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about calling him 11. I mean,
why not?
Because Jeremy Bloom will always be 11 to me. I don't know.
What'd you make of his introductory press conference down there?
Yeah, it was fascinating to me. He spoke to the media in Washington, or literally in Ashburn, Virginia. There's some interesting little nuggets. He was a little bit self-deprecating in a couple spots. A little unusual for him. He was asked what he thought of the criticism that was levied at him, and he said, which one? There was a lot of it. that was pretty funny. Everyone laughed. He was asked about why it didn't work out in Indianapolis, and he said, honestly, that's something I've been asking myself and wondering myself. And he talked about being back in the NFC East, and he almost sounded like spoke fondly of Philadelphia. It's like compared to the last place he was at, he probably loved, he's like looks back so fondly at Philadelphia. He actually had some good times here. He talked about that. talk about the importance of building. A lot of it was the same stuff we've always heard from him about building relationships. And he said, I thought I had really strong relationships with a lot of people in Philly and Indy. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe he didn't, or at least didn't have them with the right people. Just, and he said it's humbling, looking at his career. He's asked about his career arc going from Pro Bowler to getting benched and getting traded twice. And he said it's humbling, and he still believes he can be, help a team win. And I don't know. There's something really sad about it all. He just, you think about how much, the way he played in 2017, my God, it was like the best stretch I've ever seen a quarterback play. And where he is now, it's like, it's happening. But we'll see. He's looking forward to playing in the link. It's going to be really interesting. And, who knows if he'll still be, he might not even be starting at that point. See when the schedule comes out. But it's fascinating to me. His career is unlike anybody's. You try to find a parallel. RG3, he was, this electrifying guy early in his career and had a bunch of injuries, and he was never the same. The one interesting thing I thought Carson talked about, how he has to learn how to be smarter and when to keep plays alive and when to just live for another down. Something he's never really said before. He said he has to, he said, I won't change the way I play, but I need to be smarter. That was interesting. I thought, we'll see. He's had a lot of press conferences since the last time he did anything on the field. No, he wasn't terrible last year for the most part. He did, what was interesting? He talked about the Raiders and the Jaguars games, the two games at the end of the year that cost the Colts, playoff spot. And, he said, we didn't play well. And then he corrected himself. He said, I didn't play well. That was interesting. It was almost like somebody had said, you got to start taking, you got to start being accountable. He's never been accountable. And he changed from, we didn't play well. We had, we were terrible to I was terrible, whatever the word was. That was interesting. Kind of put it on himself, which is out of character. That's new for him.
Yeah, 7 years late.
Well, better late than never.
Yeah.
He's got some talent, Dave. He's got some ability, and he's got Terry McLaurin to throw to. And, we'll see what happens.
Got anything else?
No, I hope you have a great weekend.
All right. If you enjoy the Eagle Eye podcast, please rate and subscribe wherever you get your pods. If you're watching on YouTube, please click the like button and subscribe there as well. That's it. We've jammed a lot into this. We appreciate you guys. For Reuben, I'm Dave. We'll talk soon.